Welcome to the entertainment Talking Sports.
What is going on, football fans? Back at it with another New York Giants video. Hope everybody's staying safe out there. And just like yesterday, any great ideas you guys may have for a video, put them in the comments below. The video idea that gets the most likes, I will try to have a video up by the end of today. So that was a lot of fun yesterday when I broke down the Giants and Jets. But in this video, I kind of wanted to go over a topic that I've been thinking about for the last couple of months, really. And that is kind of going into the coaching tree of Bill Belichick and talking about the past failures, because after all, the common theme and what most people seem to think is everyone that's learned under Bill Belichick, for the most part, has done a very bad job, and that's, the theme. Bill Belichick's done a great job, but the guys that have coached under him have not had success. Obviously, Bill Belichick learned from Parcells, and Parcells had a much more successful coaching tree in the NFL. The guys that have learned from Belichick, not so much. But I'm going to get into some of the reasonings as to why, at least in my opinion, some of them failed, or at least are appeared or thought to have been failures. I think sometimes you got to take into account the entire situation. Now, some of them definitely were failures, and we'll get into all of it. As far as Bill Belichick goes, one thing that's never talked about is he was a failure before he became a success. If you look at the career record of Bill Belichick as a head coach, he has a career record of 273 and 127 for a career winning percentage of 683. With the New England Patriots, it is a much higher winning percentage, in which he has a winning percentage of about 750. With the Cleveland Browns, which was his first coaching stop for 5 years, he went 36 and 44, including an 11 and 5 season in 1994 before he failed miserably the following year, going 5 and 11 and was fired. So even he failed at his first stop, and it goes to show you that a lot of what coaching success has to do with is circumstance. Do you have the right pieces around you? And as much as I think Bill Belichick is the greatest coach who's ever lived, there's no denying it. Without Tom Brady, Bill Belichick is not who he was, and without the other players that he was able to accumulate throughout his years throughout the NFL. But he's certainly a great head coach. But it goes to the point that you kind of got to look at some of the situations that some of these coaches had. And the other thing I'm going to point out is what makes Joe Judge different. Why is Joe Judge so much different than these other coaches? Well, that remains to be seen. We've never seen him be a head coach in the past. But one thing I will say, Joe Judge seems grounded, which some of these coaches did not, Josh McDaniels being one of them. He also has experience on both sides of the ball. He's not a specialist like a Matt Patricia, for example, which was thought to be a defensive mastermind, or Eric Mangenius. But we'll get into all of it in this video. We'll go over all the past coaches under Bill Belichick and whether or not I actually think that they failed. But let's jump right into it. The first guy I'm going to talk about is Jim Schwartz. Jim Schwartz, of course, now a member of the Philadelphia Eagles coaching staff, but he got a job with the Detroit Lions back, I think, in 2000, around the 2006 area, somewhere along those lines. And he took over an atrocious job with the Detroit Lions. They went 0-16 the year before he got there. In 3 years' time, he turned them into a 10-6 football team. So, yeah, he only spent 5 years there, and he's perceived to be a failure. But when you take everything into consideration, he inherited an atrocious situation with the Detroit Lions. It was the only team in the history of football at the time, I believe, to have a season in which they didn't win a game. And maybe the Cleveland Browns did it before them, whatever it was. But it was as bad gets. And in 3 years' time, he had them at 10-6 to go into the playoffs. Now he got fired because the next 2 years he won a combined 11-21. But to call him a failure, to me, if you just look at his record, is not fair. You got to take into account what he inherited, everything else. Of course, the Lions, throughout his tenure there, didn't have a strong ground game, things along that nature. But he took over the worst situation anybody could ever inherit, and he did a pretty good job at it. The next guy we're going to talk about, Bill O'Brien. And Bill O'Brien is still head coach. He's with the Houston Texans. And right now, I'm pretty sure he has full control. He makes personnel decisions. And Bill O'Brien, I guess, has been successful if you just look at the record. He's 52-44. I think he's only had one losing season since taking over the job for the Houston Texans. And he served under Belichick for a number of years. I think it was 5 years. He was an offensive assistant, wide receivers coach, quarterbacks coach, as well as an offensive coordinator. So he came from an offensive background. Took over the job at Houston. And the reason he's had success in terms of the win-loss column, well, it's because of the quarterback. And some of these coaches are probably better coaches than he is. Because I honestly do not think Bill O'Brien is a good head coach in the NFL. But he inherited a good situation. He has a franchise quarterback with Deshaun Watson, and that is the reason he's been able to retain his job with the Houston Texans, because most Houston Texans fans, if you talk to them, would probably tell you he's among one of the worst head coaches in football. But because of his circumstance, he has a better record than pretty much everybody on this list. The next guy we're going to jump into is Romeo Crennel. And Romeo Crennel is a great defensive mind. You know, kind of like a guy like Matt Patricia. Great defensive mind. He first coached with Belichick with the New York Giants, where he was the defensive line coach in 1990 to 92. Before that, he was the special teams coach for the New York Giants from 81 to 89. Then became the defensive coordinator with the New England Patriots from 01 to 04 before getting his gig with the Cleveland Browns. And that's all you need to know. He took over a job with the Cleveland Browns, I believe, in 2005, and he has a career record of 28 and 55 as a head coach. And again, people look at that and they'll say, well, he's a horrible head coach. He was failed and he got fired, much like Belichick did with the Cleveland Browns. Of course, Belichick had a losing record, not quite as bad as that. But look at what Romeo Crennel had there. Look at the failed draft picks at the quarterback position. Derek Anderson was their only winning season, was with Derek Anderson as the quarterback, and that is the last winning season that the Cleveland Browns have had, believe it or not, in 2007 with Romeo Crennel as the head coach. I think they went 9-7, maybe even went 10-6. The other failed draft picks, Charlie Fry, Brady Quinn, that was their biggest problem while he was there. I think they even had Trent Dilfer as a quarterback while he was there. They didn't have any stability at the quarterback position. They didn't have a franchise quarterback. And it's going to be very hard to win games in the NFL if you don't have one. And you'll notice that's a common theme for a lot of these head coaches. Bill O'Brien, the guy with the winning record, had the franchise quarterback. Jim Schwartz did have Matt Stafford and Calvin Johnson. That certainly helped. But a lot of these guys did not have that. And that's something that Crennel did not have. He later went on to coach the Chiefs, did horrible there. I think he went 2-14 as he stepped in for 1 year. But he was not set up for success at the end of the day. And that is the main reason why I think he failed. The next guy we're going to talk about is Josh McDaniels. And Josh McDaniels, to me, is a classic guy who thinks he knows everything. Very smart, very bright mind. Learned under Belichick for a number of years before getting the job. Now he's back with the Patriots, but was a personnel assistant. He was a defensive assistant. He was a quarterbacks coach. He was an offensive coordinator and quarterbacks coach from 05 to 08. And was known as an offensive mastermind with the New England Patriots, and even got a little experience, as you heard there, on the defensive side of the ball for 2 years with the Pats from 02 to 03. So he was well-versed, and I think he's a very smart mind. But this guy, to me, like I said, is a guy that's kind of conceited, kind of full of himself. I go back to when he had the Colts job. He pulled back and went back to the New England Patriots, and he went to the Denver Broncos. He coached there for 2 years, and failed miserably. They gave him control right away. They had a really good year his first year. I think they went to the playoffs. That was the year they drafted Tim Tebow, if I'm not mistaken, in the first round, which was an atrocious draft pick, one that he's responsible for. And then he started to unload players because he thought he could copy Bill Belichick. And that's something you cannot do. You cannot mimic the greatest head coach in the history of football. You need to take parts of what you learned, but you still have to be your own man. And to me, McDaniels probably fell into that trap. He was young, probably wasn't ready for the responsibility of being a head coach yet in the NFL, and he thought he was a genius. He thought he was just going to step in and it was going to work like that, and that's not the way it works. The next guy we're going to talk about is Matt Patricia. And Matt Patricia, much like Crennel, was known to be a defensive mastermind. Was with the Patriots for a very long time. And as a matter of fact, I believe he interviewed with the Giants, and the Giants were interested in bringing him in 2017 or 18, whenever they brought in Shermer. I think it was 18. And Patricia was a hot commodity. You go back, you look at him, he coached with the New England Patriots for 14 years, from 2004 to 2017. He got his initial experience on the offensive side. He was an offensive assistant in 04, assistant offensive line coach in 05, before moving over to the defensive side. Linebackers coach for 5 years, then a safeties coach for a year, then became the defensive coordinators for 6 years with the New England Patriots, where they had a ton of success, and that was the reason that they brought him in. The Lions actually went 9-7 the year that they had moved on from Jim Caldwell, but the reason they brought Patricia in was they thought he'd come in and he'd improve the defense. Now, to be fair to Patricia, I believe that Matt Stafford was playing hurt in his rookie season, even though he played all 16 games. The team failed to make the playoffs. They regressed. They went 6-10. Last year, Stafford missed the last 8 games of the season, in which they went 3-4-1 over the first 8. They went 0-8 over the last 8 contests. But to me, Patricia's been an absolute failure. This defense last year, and he still has the job, probably because Stafford got hurt, but he was a guy that was a defensive mastermind. He's a guy that's brought in some pieces, guys like Trey Flowers, Snacks Harrison. And last year they ranked 31st in the league in yards against. Patricia has not been off to a good start, and it looks to be that he will not be a good head coach, at least with his first stint with the Detroit Lions. But maybe he'll flip the switch and turn it around in his 3rd year. But up to this point, he has been one of the biggest failures learning under Bill Belichick. The next guy we're going to talk about is Nick Saban. Nick Saban is one of the greatest coaches to ever coach in the history of football, but he's done his damage at the collegiate level. He only coached for 2 years with the Miami Dolphins in the NFL. He was the defensive coordinator under Belichick from 91 to 94 with the Cleveland Browns. Got an opportunity to coach the Miami Dolphins, in which he was around 500. He went 15-17 over the 2 years, but his biggest mistake was he chose Dante Culpepper over Drew Brees. Had he chosen Drew Brees, Nick Saban may have never coached at Alabama, so didn't have that franchise quarterback, made a bad decision, and that is why he ended up coaching at Alabama. I think we all agree that Saban probably, had he had a franchise quarterback, could have been a winning coach in the NFL. Next guy we're going to talk about is Eric Mangini, a very similar situation to that of Joe Judge. Came to New York, a guy that nobody really knew much about. He was with the New England Patriots, was very young when he took the job. I think he was the youngest coach in the NFL when he took the job with the New York Jets. He was only 35 years old, I believe, and started off with the New England Patriots, was there for a similar amount of years as to which Joe Judge was with the Patriots as well. Was there for 5 years. From 2000 to 2005, he was the defensive backs coach for 4 years, and then he was the defensive coordinator for 1 year. So Judge didn't even have that prestigious of a title. Then got the job with the New York Jets, took over for Herm Edwards, came in with moderate expectations. They exceeded them in year 1. They went 10-6, but he was out 2 years after that, where the New York Jets failed to make the playoffs, going 9-7. They acquired Brett Favre that year, started 8-3, and folded down the stretch, and they moved on from him. And then they later brought in Rex Ryan, but they didn't meet expectations with Mangini as the head coach. He then got hired right away by the Cleveland Browns, and again inherited a really tough situation, and he was out of the league a couple of years later. So, again, a guy who I think had raised expectations after he took the job for the Jets and went 10-6, but because of that, the team expects you to continue to have progress, and that did not happen with his tenure with the New York Jets. But that goes for all of these guys. They're all going to come in with very high expectations, and that's a disadvantage because they learned under Belichick. And usually when you get a head coaching job in the NFL, you're taking over a bad situation, like Brian Flores. Brian Flores last year was with the Patriots forever. He was a special teams assistant from 08 to 09. Then became an assistant offensive and special teams coach in 10, defensive assistant, safeties coach, and linebackers coach all the way up to 2018. So he learned under Belichick for 11 years before getting the job with the Miami Dolphins. And again, very similar to Joe Judge. He never had a prestigious title. The highest title he had was a linebackers coach, safeties coach, defensive assistant, but it was viewed as a young and up-and-coming smart mind with the Patriots. The Dolphins went and hired him, and they only went 5-11 last year. But it was a team that was expected to win 1 or 2 games, so maybe he will be successful because he came in with low expectations. They said, we're going to let you build this football team, similar to the situation with the New York Giants. Now, the Giants, I don't think have as low as expectations as the Dolphins had last year, but I think we have to be realistic and not expect this team to go out there and win 10 games. And if they do, I think we also got to be realistic and not fall into the trap that the New York Jets may have with Eric Mangini and set the bar too high for the next season. But at the end of the day, all of these guys had raised expectations because they learned under Bill Belichick. And some of them were set up for success, but a lot of them were set up for failure. Similar to the way that Bill Belichick was his first stint with the Cleveland Browns. I do not think that the New York Giants are setting Joe Judge up for failure. But what I do think is it is going to take more than 1 year. And I continue to express that. But I do think eventually, if we give Joe Judge the chance and we continue to draft well and keep this thing afloat, the New York Giants have all the pieces in place to make Joe Judge a successful coach. He's smart. He's brought in a good coaching staff. He has what we think and hope is a future franchise quarterback, something a lot of these coaches did not have. A lot of Joe Judge's success, of course, is going to be tied to Daniel Jones. Will he beat Tom Brady? Probably not. Tom Brady is the reason why Bill Belichick, or a huge reason why Bill Belichick has had the success he's had. Nobody would deny that, and I'm a guy that thinks Bill Belichick is more important. But you got to have patience with Joe Judge, and we have to hope that Daniel Jones progresses. But there is no reason to think that he can't be successful. I don't care what the career record of former Bill Belichick head coaches are. I think that Joe Judge has what it takes to coach the New York Giants up and hopefully win us a couple of Super Bowls in the next 10 years. As always, guys, if you liked what you watched, please subscribe, drop a comment, maybe give me a little thumbs up. Cheers.